I'm Jay Wyant, Chief Information Accessibility Officer for the state of Minnesota, and I'm happy to welcome Christian Vogler. He is the head of Technology Access Program at Gallaudet University. He came here to present about real-time text, RTT. He'll be talking about current data. It's a long, complex process, but hopefully will happen soon. We have a 90-minute presentation, so he's not going to go over time. So 90 minutes, and that's it. We will be letting him know when there's a 10-minute break. One more thing, I'm sure you have heard this, but please use an app on your devices to complete an evaluation. We'd appreciate your feedback. So please use the app. If you don't have the app on your device, you can get an evaluation paper from me. And the evaluation is confidential. Thank you. Hello, thank you. Thank you, Jay, for the introduction. So as he has already mentioned, I work for Gallaudet University, so I'm coming from an academic perspective. So my presentation today will be talking about what has happened from an academic research and development perspective to companies and to the Federal Communications Commission's regulations and so on. A lot of changes are happening right now. I've had to revise my slides again to align with recent developments that have come up. This is a hot topic and a lot of changes have been happening. Okay, all right, so I'll briefly explain who I am, who we are, and what we do. Gallaudet University is a liberal arts college for the deaf and hard of hearing. We are a research group focused on technology for the deaf and hard of hearing. How to make technology more accessible. We have a strong goal. We want the deaf and hard of hearing people to be able to function equally as hearing people. Whatever a hearing person can do, we have the privilege to do the same. So far, there's been a lot of research on phone communications, access to phone communications. But also, we do a variety of other topics. Today, we're going to be talking about real-time text, RTT in short. So I'll be referencing RTT from this point forward. This falls in the area of phone communication access. And this will provide a lot of new opportunities for deaf and hard of hearing people to gain as much access as hearing people. Anyways, we have a team of 5 people working on this, and later I'll show you a picture of our lab. We have 4 researchers, we have 2 deaf and 2 hearing individuals. If you want a summary of who I am a professional troublemaker. We collaborate closely with a variety of companies and government agencies, as well as deaf and hard of hearing customer advocacy groups. Often they don't like to hear what we have to say. So, too bad. We believe it's the right way. So I want to emphasize that we are neutral regardless of the means of communication. It doesn't matter if you use sign language or talk with your voice or use visual communication or auditory communication. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which government agency you come from, or it doesn't matter which company you work for. If your goal is to support access for people with disabilities, we'll work with you. Today, our focus is on RTT. There are 2 parts to this presentation. The first part, I'll be explaining what exactly is RTT, and some updates. The second part of the presentation, I'll be discussing how government agencies and other organizations could take advantage of RTT to improve communication for both people with disabilities and important people without disabilities. I have a visual to show of RTT, and in this visual you'll see a conversation of a text going back and forth. You'll see some text get produced. And this is a little bit different because as you can see at the bottom, there is a person who is currently typing. And as he types, the message populates. He has not finished this message, but this means with RTT, you can read exactly what the person is typing in real time. And what is being typed, it sends the message as it's being typed. Basically, what I type is being sent out immediately as the other person can read it. So if a hearing person calls another person using their voice, and the other person hears this person talk, sometimes that person might misspeak or self-correct. This same concept applies to RTT. With real-time text, you see what is being typed out, and sometimes mistakes are made. You can self-correct, but the important thing is that it helps out a lot. If a hearing person calls and the other person hears that this question's not being answered, the speaker might be going off the point, and the other person can't tell the speaker to stop or to slow down or to say, hey, that's not what I meant. But this works out better for a better conversation. RTT has the same concept. If you type something and the person notices that you're going off topic, the person can interrupt you in real time and try to reel it back to the right topic or question. I'll be explaining more in depth of the difference between RTT and text messaging in a little bit. RTT has two important characteristics. First, it sends out what you type immediately and gives you the opportunity to read it as it's being typed. That means there's no delay, and the other person can read it almost immediately. The second important characteristic is that you can accommodate typing with speech at the same time. Some people are profoundly deaf, like me, for example, and I'll only be able to use the typed part. But a lot of people who use their voice or who are hard of hearing, those people will be able to use both features at the same time. Sometimes they can speak, sometimes they can type. A person can speak, and if they can understand me, great. But if they're not sure of what they're saying, they can just type it out immediately after. And I'll give you a few videos later to show you or to help you understand what that really means. I'll be showing you two videos. The first video will show you two situations. The first situation is between a deaf and hearing neighbor. In this situation, the deaf individual has a child, and the child goes to the hearing neighbor's house, and the deaf neighbor just saw a tornado warning. In a hurry, he talks to the neighbor to make sure he knows and to make sure they're safe. There's no time for a longer process or a delay in communication. He needs to call and be connected immediately.
A title in the past is superimposed over a sequence of TTYs, starting with a bulky teletypewriter to more refined miniaturized units. Now to the future. In an office setting, a middle-aged man, Norman Williams, Senior Research Engineer, Technology Access Program.
We have exciting news.
He signs.
The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, cast a historic 5-0 vote yesterday on a new communications technology called real-time text, or RTT. For you, deaf, hard of hearing, hearing, and everyone. On new mobile devices, starting at the end of December 2017, you will be able to type in real time during a call. The goal is that in a few years, RTT devices will replace TTYs everywhere. Let's look at an RTT product in action.
A tablet displays a call log screen with text, incoming call from Greg V. A finger taps the screen to accept the call. Then a black split screen and the finger taps a handset button. A keyboard pops up. Fingers type hello, displayed in white font on the right. On the left in yellow, text in real time, character by character. This is your neighbor. Are my kids with yours at your home? A response displays hello, yes, they're here. There's a tornado warning in 2 mins. Fingers type, wow, thanks. You must, whew, as fingers continue to type in white, we'll seek shelter now. A young man signs, Christian Vogler, Ph.D., Director, Technology.
Okay, so what you've seen in this video, you might have noticed a few things. First, the conversation was happening very quickly. You noticed how a neighbor answered the phone and at the same time the text is being sent talking about the tornado warning. And before he finished typing, the neighbor answered him by telling him not to worry and that the kids are safe. So people type and send messages together at the same time. So if you try to communicate with text message, this is what would happen. I would text you that there's a tornado warning. I type the whole message without the neighbor reading it. When I finish the text, I'll send it. Then the neighbor will get the message. The neighbor answers, oh, okay, thank you, we're safe. Types this out. I have to wait while he's typing it. And then he can send it before I can open it. That's a prolonged process of communication. With real-time text, you see the conversation is fast and fluid. I don't want to highlight RTT as being used only for emergency situations. It's useful for many other situations. In the next video, I'll show you an informal conversation between two friends. They're trying to make plans to go to a movie theater.
Instant message I am style in a yellow chat bubble. Christian Vogler, 240-555-2888. So let's talk about our plans today. In a blue bubble, me, 240-444-4777. So we will meet and watch Star Wars Rogue tonight. Any idea when and where? In italics, is typing. Then, I want to meet at Regal Chinatown next to Verizon Center at 10 p.m. My wife will come too. I just asked her. No, stop. I prefer open captions, not those caption glasses. Let's do AMC Germantown instead of 9 p.m. They have OC. Oops. Then patented I am style real-time text in yellow from Christian. So let's talk about our plans today. At bottom, so we will meet and watch Star Wars Rogue tonight. Any idea when and where? Typing. I want to meet at the Regal Chinatown next to Verizon and oh, no, stop. I prefer open captions, not those caption glasses. Okay, let's do AMC.
Okay. In this video, what you saw were two examples shown for comparison. The first example is a regular back and forth texting scenario. The friend told me to go to the movie theater and that he'll have his wife meet at the movie theater. And then after I read it, I told him to go to the other movie theater, but he had already told his wife. And now he has to tell his wife that plans changed. In the second example is shown of real-time text. Both people can see what's being typed at the same time. I was told that I wanted to go there, and the friend interrupted me and told me to meet at the other theater. And in this situation, we avoided a misunderstanding. There's one more video I'd like to show. And so far, real-time text focuses on typing only. Now I'll show an example of how real-time text combined with voice will also help. In this video, you'll see an example where a doctor's office calls a hard of hearing person. And the hard of hearing person can hear on the phone and understands most of it, but sometimes might misunderstand something, so the doctor's office uses real-time text to send a message, ensuring that that person understands completely.
Title: Doctor's Office, making a real-time text call with voice to Ms. Smith, who is hard of hearing.
Hi, Miss Smith. We changed your appointment to this afternoon.
Okay, see you in 20 minutes.
Not until this afternoon, Miss Smith.
Woman texts on cell phone. The appointment is this afternoon.
Yes, see you at the office soon.
Miss Smith, please look at your phone.
Oh, I see. This afternoon. I thought it was this morning.
No, we moved it to 3 o'clock.
Woman texts on cell phone. 3 o'clock.
So what you saw was a hard of hearing person who thought the appointment was confirmed for the morning. The person was ready to go to the doctor's office that morning, but the receptionist at the doctor's office clarified by typing that it was an afternoon appointment. And by the way, if you have any questions through this presentation, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. As I've mentioned, real-time text and text messages are different. Now I'll be explaining with more clarity how these two systems are different. I have a lot of experience with a lot of people who are not sure why we need real-time text when we already have text messaging. And as you know, most of you, perhaps all of you, use text messages often. It doesn't matter if you're deaf or hearing or hard of hearing, we all text frequently. Even though you're hearing and can hear, you use text. That's not a problem. But oftentimes, hearing people make voice calls. And in many different situations, text messages are usually informal, more casual in nature, and you send messages by saying, hello, what's up, and so on. Sometimes you don't expect the other individual to read it or reply right away. Sometimes you might have to wait an hour or so for the person to respond. Something might come up in the middle of the conversation and the person might not respond for a while. And then they might get back to you a couple hours later, or even tomorrow the person comes back and the conversation continues. With voice-to-voice calls, the situation requires the conversation to happen now. So you have to have a full conversation and you have to make sure you get the person's attention and discuss until the issues, whatever they may be, are resolved. So the text message feature is accessible to deaf and hard of hearing, while voice calls are not fully accessible as of now. So real-time text is connected with voice calls. This concept makes sure whether that you're deaf or hard of hearing, with real-time text, voice calls are more accessible. Okay, the goal is whenever you give the voice phone number, it would allow people to call you. And the goal would also be to use RTT at any time a call happens. So if you can't speak on the phone or can't hear the phone, you can still use real-time text. I have a question for the audience, if you don't mind, by a show of hands, if you've heard of a TTY device. Okay, so a TTY, well, RTT technology exists because we have to replace the TTY. We have to. It's not optional. A TTY is a 50-year-old technology device. It started up showing the deaf and hard of hearing community in the 1960s and 70s to make phone communication accessible. It was the first time for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, but there were a lot of downsides and also a lot of limitations. The biggest, most severe downside is that the TTY does not work for internet phone calls. If you make a TTY call on the internet, you run a high risk of having the text appear as garbled. Also, many people have moved on to a more advanced technology. Many people are now using captioned telephone and video relay services. These are excellent pieces of technology, but they also have a big downside as well. With a TTY, you can place a direct call with a person without a third party. Both video relay service and captioned telephone service involves a third party to help conduct the call. For example, in a video relay service situation, I'd be talking through a sign language interpreter. With a captioned telephone system, you receive the captions through an operator who talks to an automatic speech recognition system. Both of these are not perfectly accurate. For example, the interpreter sometimes does not understand what I'm saying. So if I'm in a deep and complicated conversation about a medical issue or a legal question, if the interpreter doesn't know about the content or the subject, the interpreter will be prone to misunderstandings, and that will mangle the conversation. Caption telephones have a lot of issues with errors and delays. So these services are great, but they're not perfect. Sometimes it's better to have a direct conversation. A direct communication system with a person because he is an expert and I know exactly what I want. It is much better to have a direct conversation. In the past, that was done through the use of a TTY. But like I said, a TTY is now obsolete. It can't work through internet phone calls. It's very slow. It's very limited. It's time to replace it with real-time text. Here are two examples of how real-time text is much better than a TTY. The first example is with real-time text, you can type and send at the same time. You can interrupt each other since you are typing and responding at the same time. In a TTY, you have to wait for your turn because two simultaneous messages will garble the conversation. And a TTY only works for American English. If you call someone who speaks a different language, it's possible that they might use a different alphabet. And the TTY wouldn't work to provide effective communication, but with real-time text, you can. It supports Unicode completely. With Unicode, it can support any language in the world. If your phone supports that language, that means RTT will support that language as well. So if, for example, if you call a person who speaks Chinese, real-time text will allow you to communicate with them. It'll work effectively. I'll cover some benefits of real-time text and why it's good for deaf and hard of hearing users, and why it's also good to provide access. Here are several examples I'll be going through. The most important thing, the most significant thing, is that real-time text will become available on every mobile phone. We're getting there in just a minute. Which means comparing with the past when the TTY was a special piece of equipment for deaf and hard of hearing users, if someone wanted to communicate with a deaf or hard of hearing person, he or she or a government agency had to buy a TTY device and set it up. So many people said, no, no thanks, it's too much work, it might be too expensive, or I'm not interested in purchasing that device. However, real-time text is on every phone, which means it's completely different and every person will be able to send and receive a real-time text. You don't need any special equipment. It means for the first time, deaf and hard of hearing people will have more access to communication, just like a hearing person would be with their phone. So, we should be able to call a government agency effortlessly. They could call a company or order a pizza. We could call whoever we want, a neighbor to meet at the pool, you name it. If 911 is not available for any reason, and I'll give you an example of that, emergencies can happen anywhere. And if there's a long wait on the phone and I need immediate help, I can tell my neighbor to come. To the point, this has a lot of benefits for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So real-time text can actually be beneficial for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're deaf, hard of hearing, or hearing, and I'm going to show you how it can benefit people who can hear. First of all, I really hope people will adopt this idea and run with it. Often a call would be connected to a phone tree, for example. Press 1 for English, press 2 for Spanish. You indicate that you want English. Then it'll say, please listen carefully to your 4 options. Press 1 for customer service, press 2 for sales, press 3 for an officer, and so on. Press 5 for insanity and professional help. And you go through this tree, it's terrible. You have to wait a long time, listen through all the options. It's quite painful. When you press your button, you listen to a whole new set of options. So if everyone has real-time text and is using it, what you could do is they'll send you a list of options before speaking. You could read the options immediately in real-time text. And reading it has 2 upsides. First, for more people, reading is faster. Second option is that it's easier to search and find the option you want. You don't have to wait and listen through the whole entire phone tree. Another example is when you need to provide your credit card number or a phone number. If you're speaking to a person on the other end, the person has to write it down or remember it. And if you're sending it through real-time text, it makes it a lot easier for that person to copy and paste that information. And also, if you want to spell out a name over a phone, sometimes you need to provide phonetical help, such as V as in Victor, A as in Alpha, and so on. With people misspell my last name and my wife's last name frequently. So it's just easier to type and send names as well. Suppose you want to book a flight through an airline and they ask for your credit card number. When people are around, they could hear you speaking on your mobile phone. They could hear you say your credit card number. There might not be some privacy, but if you type it, it's private. No one can read your text and get your number. This also helps if you're in a noisy environment. Suppose you're making a call next to someone working on a jackhammer. It would be almost impossible to have a verbal conversation. On the other end, the person may not hear anything. However, typing and sending your message would help. We have a question. And you'll probably be talking about this later, but are there current laws regarding real-time text? That's a great question, and yes, I'll be mentioning that later. So I just gave you a lot of the pros about adopting real-time text. And now I'll be giving you a brief summary of what's been happening right now. As of right now, the FCC is working on replacing the TTY with real-time text. They're making new rules on mobile devices. In short, they require giving phone companies options to continue supporting TTY or to switch to real-time text. All phone companies will definitely switch to real-time text. The phone companies hate using TTY equipment. If they switch, they are required to support real-time text and voice features in the same call. They have to be backward compatible with TTY devices. So because we know TTY is considered old technology and a real-time text would be current technology, I have to be able to use real-time text to make a TTY call. More specifically for 911 or 711 relay services. All of the phone companies who provide real-time text are required to be able to interoperate. Uh, to interoperate has a simple definition. Suppose I use AT&T and you use Verizon and you use Sprint, for example. We should all be able to use real-time text to call each other. You may remember when mobile devices first showed up, different companies couldn't call each other. And that has quickly been resolved. This requirement makes sure that this isn't an issue with real-time text. You can use real-time text to call someone using a different carrier. And someone just asked me, how does that work? Well, technology is standard. It's an open standard. Everybody uses it. It's called RFC 4103. It interoperates perfectly with voice over IP communications, which means that if a company who supports VoIP, it's easy for that company to get the support they need with that technology. It's very easy. It's the same as if you want to support video and voice. It's very easy to add this into the system. And this is very important because in the second part of the presentation, I'll be focusing on what government agencies can do. And we're getting back to what is happening right now. Remember when I mentioned that the FCC had released some new rules? It'll be effective 3 weeks from now. December 31st. The big four phone companies that are out there, AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, and T-Mobile, must support real-time text as of December 31st. And some of the other subjects are still being investigated by the FCC. So as I've mentioned, it's 3 weeks from now. It's very soon. And the first step, which we would consider a baby step, is to get phone companies to make a downloadable app be available. Later in 2019, all new phones will have a built-in real-time text feature, which means that the downloadable app is only going to be temporary. So 2 years from now, all phone devices will have a built-in real-time text feature. So it's interesting to see some phone companies start offering downloadable apps. Other phone companies have started with the built-in features of phone makers. So the recent iOS 11.2 upgrade with Verizon, those phones let you use real-time text. You can see that it shows up in your settings. If you turn it on and make a voice call with another person who has real-time text enabled, an icon will show up on the phone screen. And clicking this icon will turn on real-time text. Some of my friends have tested it and verified that it works. And just today, this morning, AT&T published their app on the Android store. And it's available now. I've already checked. And as for an iOS operating system, they're still waiting for approval to put that on the App Store. Any questions so far at this point in the presentation? Yes, Jay. And Jay's question is, for someone who uses an Android phone with Sprint, you're saying that if I want to use the app, but if I don't use an iPhone, I can download the app on January 1st? So I can't speak for Sprint. I don't know when exactly and what exactly they're doing, but two things are happening. You can go to the Android store and find an app for Sprint. Uh, One possibility, or I guess maybe another possibility is Sprint will say, sorry, we don't support an older version of an Android phone, or maybe they will only support iPhones right now. I'm not 100% sure. But the first step requires for them to only support one type of phone. So AT&T seems to be supporting a variety of phones right now. I hope Sprint is doing the same, but I can't confirm that. I don't know what they're doing right now. I know if we wait till December 31st, we'll find out more. Any questions? Any other questions? Okay. So remember at this point, real-time text will be on every mobile phone in the future. And so it's starting right now, and it'll continue with an end date for 2019. Again, that's for the big four phone companies. The smaller phone companies have to be ready by 2021. So as I mentioned, this is the first time that a regular phone will be fully accessible for the deaf and hard of hearing using voice calls. It's a really exciting opportunity and a great win for all communities involved. I'll begin to briefly talk about the legal situation right now and what that looks like. So we have the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, and of course, Section 508. And there are two things with that. So far, many federal and state agencies have TTYs. Of course, less and less people use TTYs today. Most of them have put a TTY in a corner and let dust accumulate. They don't get TTY calls for them anymore. They're just sitting there. Secondly, voice over IP communications is currently under a completely different law. And this law is the 21st Century Communication and Video Accessibilities Act, CVAA for short. And this law basically says that if you provide an advanced communication service, then it must be accessible. Voice over IP, real-time text, and video communications are all under the Advanced Communications Service. And this doesn't force you to provide RTT. Yeah, again, it does not force you to provide real-time text. However, but if you do provide real-time text, you have to make sure it's accessible to people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deaf, blind, blind, and so on. And now, this is the part where it could get a little complicated. Jay, just before lunch, Jay was talking about Section 508. He talked about some of the changes that were happening, and he mentioned some changes in phone communications. And then he asked me to talk about it. So I'll be talking briefly about what's happening. And unfortunately, as of right now, there is a lot of confusion in this area. The old language in Section 508 said something like you have to provide voice communications and a TTY. The new Section 508 removed the TTY language, and they're saying that they will hold off on real-time text until later. The U.S. Access Board said that there are too many changes happening right now, and they're not ready to include it in Section 508. They're waiting for the FCC to figure out all these details before putting it in. So we're waiting to see what happens with the FCC and then come back to it later. So I can't predict what exactly will happen, but please don't hold me to this, but this is what I think will happen. As the FCC figures out what to do with real-time text for mobile phones, they will be looking at Section 255 for phone communication access. But what we don't know is after they figure that out, they might also go back to Section 508 to make sure that they both work together. So even though Section 508 is somewhat vague, if you provide fully accessible service to all citizens, then you need to make sure you provide as many communication options as possible. Even though the legal requirement is not currently there, I encourage you all to proactively think about how to make real-time text available. There are two reasons. The first is to provide access, and the second one that it'll benefit everyone. So now I will talk about what could happen in the near future. How today, soon, government organizations or agencies can receive a call from a mobile user using real-time text, and also how to receive or take that call. With the first situation, you see a customer on a mobile phone using real-time text to call the agency. The agency receives the call through a TTY. And that is expected to work because the FCC requires these two devices to be interoperable. However, this is an easy and cheap way out. I don't recommend this because you become stuck with an old, limited technology for a while. And this is not my idea of a good service because it forces you to type slowly and it's limited. So no, don't do it. But if you do have a TTY, what could happen in the near future is that you start receiving more calls. Like I mentioned, many of these TTYs are abandoned or gathering dust. And now would be a good time to check your TTY call handling protocols to make sure that they work. Make sure someone knows how to use it. Yes, Jay, do you have a question? Jay's question. So I'm curious, a TTY is considered ancient technology, but how does same-time communications work? If you interrupt, how does that work? Okay, I'll tell you what I want, and then I'll tell you what phone companies agreed to do. So when real-time text connects with a TTY, the problem is when they both type at the same time. Real-time text user doesn't know that the other user is a TTY. The real-time text user will think that they're typing the message at the same time, but the conversation will come across as scrambled. So in that situation, you have to make sure that both ends wait for their turn to type. And that's another reason why you should throw out the TTY and then figure out how to offer real-time text in your office. And then let me give you a second situation. Again, we're talking about mobile phones. The agency sets up a software that supports real-time text. It's already part of the software that's available today. I have some on my phone right there. And if there's time after the presentation, I'll welcome you all to come and try it out for yourself. And the software is available and it works through the internet. And the software uses the exact same technology as what's on mobile phones. It sends and receives real-time text. It sends and receives audio as well. So the FCC rule mentions one standard for interoperating, the RFC 4103. And this software supports this as well as mobile phones. It will interoperate. The one thing that's missing right now, and again, it's one thing, is that we have to set up a connection between the phone company and the VoIP provider for your agency. So I don't know what the companies are using, but suppose the provider is Vonage. Then they have to figure out an agreement with the phone company to add real-time text and be able to connect it. Again, I want to emphasize with the technology of today, it's not hard to do. The technology piece is not hard. Okay, this is the goal for the future. It takes time to establish this and to get the software edited and developed. If you're ambitious and you're looking for fast benefits, you have a third option. And the third option, as some of you may already know, is, for example, such as a company such as Amazon or another company. They've set up web-based communication system. So once you have a problem, you can connect through a website. And a lot of website communication systems are already out there and in use. Some offer video and audio, and some are starting to offer real-time text. So the nice thing about web-based systems is that you could set it up tomorrow. It's already out there and there's a lot to choose from, which means that the mobile phone user who can't use their phone right now, you have to send the user to a web page and they have to connect to be provided with services. Whether or not they're disabled or not disabled, they could use voice, video, or real-time text. And so you have three options, really. It seems that you have to make some effort to figure out how to plan for that. You may need to purchase some software and figure out how to keep it operating. That might be a lot of work, maybe. I'm emphasizing again on why it's so important. And the top reason, the first reason, is you're supposed to be accessible, right? We have to be accessible. If you do not provide this, then you're not fully accessible. A voice phone number is not enough. So we should provide an option for direct communication. As I've mentioned, a third party on video or caption telephone might mangle the conversation sometimes. Direct conversation minimizes the risk of miscommunication. Some companies and some agencies have set up a text chat feature on their websites. And if you have that, consider real-time text. The reason is because conversation would be faster and fluent than as you read, because you can start thinking of a response as the other person is typing. If it's a conventional back and forth text chat, you don't have the same features. With real-time text, you speed up the conversation tremendously. And I'm telling you, it's a lot more fun too. Lastly, even if you neglect people with disabilities, like I know all of you care about it, but suppose, hypothetically, you didn't care about this. Real-time text benefits people who can hear, like I shared the phone tree example. So, what has to happen to get there? Technology is ready. Anyone can start getting that going right now. The biggest remaining task is to figure out how the voice over IP provider and real-time text connect with mobile phones. So the technology standards are there, both the voice over IP So I want to share some specific names and types of software that we have available today. If you're interested, you can explore these. This list, all of this software are either the ones I know or the ones used that my friends or coworkers use. To be clear, we're talking about mentioning these software products does not mean that I fully endorse it. It's just the information. It's not a complete list of what's out there. There are other companies that are working on this, but just to give you a few. If you set up real-time text in its own voice over IP environment, there are some options that you have. One is called ECT Touch or EC Touch. I have it here on my device. Then we have PUC. Okay, Jay asked me what SIP means, S-I-P. SIP stands for Session Initiation Protocol, known as SIP or SIP. And this specifies how any voice over IP phone and new mobile phone can set up a connection. So the first is EC Touch and PUC, and make sure you Google some of the other ones that are out this. And some video relay services are using these features. There's open source software. Lin Phone also offers this. Second, you have some options for web-based services. The first one is called ACE Direct. It was developed by a contract with the FCC through MITRE. MITRE was the developer of this product, and it's available today. You can download and set it up. Other companies that provide services with similar concepts could be Solves, ECWeb, also a lot of others. One of the cool things about these options is that most of them support all three: video, audio, and real-time text. All three of those services in one. So you got to think bigger than you thought. Don't focus on just audio and real-time text. Suppose you have a lot of deaf or hard of hearing signers, you can use the video as well, and people who sign. This software will do videos, real-time text, audio. It'll do all three of these services. Basically, whatever you do, again, I'm emphasizing, review your TTY protocols. If you still have the TTY, a review of the protocols could probably get you some calls. So I want you to think about three things. The first is real-time text can make communication much more efficient and much more accessible. Second, real-time text is coming to all mobile phones. No matter what, it will come. Many companies are starting to implement real-time text into their software and their platforms. I'm letting you know that real-time text is also an important part of the next generation of 911 services. So a lot of areas are starting to implement these features. Some federal contracts are looking into this as well. Okay, in general, like I shared in the beginning, my perspective is an academic perspective because I work with the university that focuses on research and the users who are using it. I know what phone companies are planning to do and what the government is planning on doing. But what I don't know is the perspective of state agencies, agencies that closely interact with their clients. So I'm going to give you two discussion points. And you don't have to stick to this. If you have other questions or ideas, please feel free to share. But the two discussion questions, from the perspective of an agency, what opportunities and barriers do you see for deploying real-time text? And secondly, how do we make sure that in the future, when setting up a new contract for phone communication services, do we include real-time text? So let's go ahead and discuss those two questions. I see some blank stares. Does that mean I've overwhelmed you with the information? And Jay has a question saying the defining factor from my perspective is that section 508 is that the hardware requirements in section 508 requires full accessibility. So the hardware intervention in section 508, what we should do is ask VoIP vendors, what are you doing? And they said, well, we'll get back to you later on that. And they are presenting this Friday. And what I plan to do is to ask and hopefully find out soon about their plan for real-time text. From the hardware perspective, I think it can be supported, but for the wireless perspective, it won't be easy. Jay, thank you for your comments. It's great to see uh, some positive thinking. And as I've always said, the hardware should be ready because most of the phones have a screen. If it has a screen and any of the recent hardware will be able to develop the software and receive and display real-time text. And also, some of the hardware has the ability to connect to an exterior keyboard through a Bluetooth connection. It's part of the requirement for accessibility anyways. So suppose there's a blind person who uses Braille. That means we should be able to connect with any keyboard. So if you have both a screen and the keyboard, then real-time text will not require much computing power. Most of the hardware has these two things, a screen and a keyboard, and it should be able to support real-time text. So from my point of view is that don't ask hardware manufacturers because the hardware will support it. Instead, ask about the software. Yes, another question. The question is, with the new real-time text, with voice over IP compatibility, that the new phone tree integrates with voice over IP. As a phone system, the voice over IP separates the audio and video. And that's correct. The software, the ACE Direct, was developed by the FCC for that purpose, to integrate video and voice calls into one. Another question in the back. The speaking part is similar to autoplay for screen readers attached to a specific phone for people who are blind. So if you're listening to a call and you get a text at the same time, how can a blind user pause the screen reader so you don't get both interrupting each other or overlapping at the same time? And that is an excellent question. And that is an issue right now. The FCC has established an advisory committee called the Disability Advisory Committee, the DAC. And they looked into that recently, and they're looking into how to make sure that RTT is fully accessible to people who are blind and how to interoperate it with the screen reader as well as Braille. So there will be a roundtable meeting, I'm guessing around February next year. I'm not quite sure yet the exact date, and they'll be getting people from manufacturers, phone companies, screen reader manufacturers, Braille manufacturers, um, to all come to the table and getting together to figure out how to delegate responsibilities and to decide who does what. So what we know right now is that it's technically possible. I know because the deaf-blind community has used that system in the past based on IP services. It will happen. If it doesn't happen, that means it's basically breaking the law. Another question or comment? And this is Jay again. You had asked me about barriers, and one barrier is a cultural barrier because when we talk about real-time text, we forget about the relay services. If we focused on the texting part, we forget about the video phone and call directly, but that person could try uh, to sign, and we don't know if there's a person who can basically read sign language. So what can we do? Hope that the person is smart enough to say, I don't understand sign language, please type what you're telling me. Uh, what we need is to have a lot of training and a lot of cultural developments. And will that happen in the future? And there's one way on how we can avoid confusion to make sure that there's no confusion is if an agency or organization is not ready to sign, then don't offer the video portion yet. Only offer the audio and real-time text. That's one way to do it for now. And some people will object. Some people will say, to prefer to sign, and that's fine. But to get started, it's important to start with a baby step and then figure out the next steps after that. And with real-time text, you're reaching out to a larger potential audience. So keep that in mind. Okay, well, I know there's not a lot of time left, and I see a lot of people scribbling some notes. And if you want to play with some of the technology that I have up here, if you'd like to stay for a little bit and see what it looks like, please feel free. You're welcome to do so. And this is Jay. One question I wanted to ask for clarification with mobile phone technology. Does real-time text work with 3D and 4D? Sorry, 3G or 4G services. So if the 3G is connected, does it support that speed? And it currently supports 4G and Wi-Fi. More companies want to offer Wi-Fi based calling. Like AT&T did their own investigation and they found that it is impossible to use TTY through Wi-Fi calling. So by offering Wi-Fi calls, that means they're breaking the rule.